And that's actually the first step. But I think it's only when we change the climate of opinion will we be successful in ever having any political change. I don't think, I think that has to be this is, say always Ron Paul, you notice he always uses his campaigns as a bully pulpit to educate. He doesn't actually engage in the normal dealings of Washington and the House of Representatives, where you vote for my bill, I'll vote for your bill, and I'll agree to this spending if you agree to this spending. He doesn't actually engage in regular politics at all. It's an educational mission for him. So I think that's I think we first of all become educated yourself, and then people will come to you. And it's unfortunately not possible. We all wish we had a 12-step plan to bring this about. You can't just take somebody by the lapels and shake them and say, "Let me explain this to you." It doesn't. We can think back to the New Testament, where our Lord was sending out the disciples for the first time to various cities to teach the gospel, and he said, "If people have ears to hear, teach them. If they don't have ears to hear, shake the dust off your feet and move on to the next town." So I think that's actually, we just have to concentrate on the people who actually want to know and who want to hear, and you can't, the others who don't want to hear and don't want to know, you have to leave that to somebody else. Yes, sir.
I wanted to kind of talk about a historical context in American history that might have a lot of parallels to what's going on right now, and that would have been the central banking crisis back in 1835 with Andrew Jackson, when he dissolved the central bank, the national bank as it was called, and created a series of pet banks with the specie circular, which then resulted pretty much directly in the Panic or Depression of 1837. I was wondering, how do we go about getting rid of the Federal Reserve without going through that tremendous deflationary crisis that took place after the dissolution of that national bank in the 1830s and the chaos that resulted from that?
These are, of course, all fascinating questions about how to do it. Murray Rothbard, in his book Mystery of Banking, that we're just bringing back into print, has a long discussion of this. We can look at how it happened under the Grant administration after the Civil War, how the country went back on the gold standard. Nothing wrong with deflation, by the way, as long as, deflation is a normal way of the market. When the money supply is not being artificially increased and the tremendous increase in goods and services that capitalism provides, money becomes more valuable over time. That is, there's a deflation. We saw this, in fact, in most of American history, except for wars, until the establishment of the Fed. So that's normal. But to avoid a crisis, Murray says that you have to just price the dollar-gold ratio properly. And he talks about how one would do that. But my own view is we can settle those questions after we've changed the climate of opinion on the Fed itself and the need for. But these are all great. These are great questions for scholars, and Joe Salerno's written about it, and many others too. But I recommend Rothbard also his little book, The Case Against the Fed, which talks about some of this going back on a gold standard too, or going forward to a gold standard. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for your talk, and I'm Eric Young from Chesapeake Beach. Actually, I prefer platinum over gold, but anyway. One step back.
Russian Empire actually minted platinum coins. They never actually circulated, but I think it's that was the first time that happened. But sorry, go ahead.
Dr. Friedman, Milton Friedman, I've read quite a bit of his things, and actually I was involved in how to establish a balanced government approach as far back as the 70s. But reading Dr. Friedman, I'm kind of, and of course, he wanted to control money and talked about monetary restraint. I'd like to take a step back along with him and consider the idea that maybe some kind of overall control of the size of the government, again through constitutional amendment, in addition to a balanced budget. Dr. Friedman talked about pluses and minuses of, say, 20%. So I came up with the idea of the 2010, which would be a 20% limit, cap if you like, of the size of the government, 10% being entitlements and direct payments, and the others being actually appropriated and so on. And in that way, you really control the intrusiveness of the government in the overall economy in perhaps a more general way. I mean, I appreciate the need for monetary restraint, and I think you're right there. But this also gets at the fiscal restraint. I guess other speakers are going to talk about the trade balance, but for the fiscal balance, what do you think about that as well?
Well, I'm all for anything that
balance?
restrains the government. I mean, they don't pay too much attention to the Constitution as it is. So whether they pay attention to another amendment, I don't know. I mean, they ignore everything. They seem to ignore everything except sort of things like a senator shall serve 6 years, right? They never have the senator serve 7 years or 5 years or whatever, but that seems to me that's all they pay attention to. They don't. Milton Friedman was a great man, a great economist, and very, very free market in virtually every single way. A reason that he got the Nobel Prize, was a favorite of the Reagan administration, the Bush administration, got the Medal of Freedom, got all the rest of these government encomiums, is because he was for the Fed. And he always wanted to point attention away from the central bank to other things. And he was an advocate of the Federal Reserve, and that was his baby. It's the whole Chicago school is that way. So I think while we can certainly learn from Milton Friedman in a whole host of areas, his little book, Capitalism and Freedom, is one of the great books ever written. Especially love his stuff about a free market in medical care and end of licensure, end of a system that, for example, would put a nurse in jail for seeing a patient without going through a doctor. So he's just terrific libertarian. But I think on money he's not. I think Mises and Rothbard are the better guides there.
Could you comment on the work being done by David Horowitz and his Center for the Study of Popular Culture, both in the universities, and now he has a program in the high schools with regard to educating the public?
Well, David Horowitz is a very interesting man. He, before 9/11, he seemed to me a sane man, and he was actually interested in teaching economics and so forth. He entirely, of course, flipped out, and today he impresses me as some kind of commissar. I mean, calling for people to be jailed and calling for endless wars in the Middle East, and calling on everyone to be dedicated to his particular parochial agenda in foreign affairs. And he's against all civil liberties. He's sort of a Michael Savage type for nuking all Arabs and slitting the throat of every Muslim and so forth. I think he's a terrible man. And his Islamofascism, of course, another made-up word. There's no, whatever's wrong with Islamic fundamentalists, they're not fascists. I mean, that's a separate political ideology. I suppose they would have called them Islamo-Nazis if they thought they could get away with it, but Islamofascist was about as far as the neocons felt they could go. But he spreads this hatred of Muslims and fever for perpetual war in colleges, and he attacks. He has a program that's ostensibly to silence and get rid of left-wing professors on campuses. But if you notice the way he defines a left-wing professor, it's somebody who disagrees with perpetual war in the Middle East. That's a leftist. So I should just mention that Mr. Horowitz has attacked me and Justin Raimondo, many of others, so I have a personal dog in this fight too. But he just seems to be one of the, I was going to say one of the worst of the neocons. He's a typical neocon, and I think his organization is terrible, he's terrible, and he represents everything that we have to entirely reject if we have any hope of having a decent society.